everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I am Skylar with Lean Frontiers. On our screen, you can see Jim, Oscar, and Dirk. Just a quick reminder, you will receive a link from me within 24 to 48 hours. That does include the link to the recording. Oscar, they have well, no, we're not, but you
Got
can
them
go ahead
there.
and take over, but they're falling in.
Yeah, I can see them coming in. We normally have about a third, so that's spot on. So thanks again. As we always start with these, a lot of work goes on behind the scenes with this sort of stuff. I know, Skylar, and so thank you very much for the effort that you put into making these happen very efficiently. So I'm joined by Dirk van Rossum, who currently serves as Director of Centre of Excellence on the executive team at Helena Industries, and they are a chemical manufacturing company in the ag crop protection industry. So Dirk's a mechanical engineer with 30 years operational continuous improvement leadership experience, spanning industries such as aerospace, medical devices, and automotive manufacturing and medical care. So you've all had an opportunity to submit questions when you're registered, but if anyone has any questions while we're having this discussion, then please put them into the Q&A and we'll endeavour to get to them along with the other ones. So firstly, Dirk,
Mm.
it's the $50 million question we get asked all the time in the work in the field we do, and that is where to start. And our answer is never helpful because we always say it just depends. So first of all, what were you getting started on? So you started with Kata, but what were you getting started on? Why and how did that all fit?
Right, and I agree with that question and that answer. I think something to think about is what problem are we trying to solve, or what improvement were we aiming for in the organization? So when I joined Helena Industries almost 4 years ago now, one of the expectations was that we wanted to have a perspective on people and enhance engagement of our employees. So that was one aspiration that was out there. And another one was manufacturing excellence, whatever that meant, but getting really good at what we do, getting even better than what we do, even though we're a top competitor in our field. So I started raising questions around that. So, describe that a little bit more. What does that really mean? And we started going down
Which part, the people bit or the excellence bit, or both?
both of them. If we're aiming in that direction and take these two
Yes.
things into consideration, what does it really mean? Help me understand that a little bit more. Let's paint out this picture. And
Yes.
I started going down the path of using the improvement kata questions at a high level, right? So turning that into, okay, so formulating verbally a challenge statement of what does that look like down the road?
Yeah, right.
And then using the Shingo principles ideas and systems thinking in the background. All right, so what behaviors do we want from which people in the organizations, leaders, managers, and front line? What does that look like? Just have conversations around that.
So who were
Um,
those conversations with out of the executive?
that was with the executive team and with the plant managers.
Okay.
So my first go around with plant managers, for instance, my questions hinged around the improvement card. I said, where are you aiming to get to? What are your pain points? Where are you now? So what are those pain points in there? And what's the next destination that you're aiming for? And explained the improvement card as a routine, as a model, as a pattern of thinking for them to be thinking about in that regard. And that kind of got the thinking started. And then
So what
around
sort of
those two aspirations.
what sort of answers did you get there as a matter of interest? Do you remember from the operations people? Was it, the usual productivity, quality, safety type stuff, or?
It was typically productivity and safety type stuff, production type things, not so much quality things, and indeed also around engagement and retaining people. The company had gone through a time period with a lot of churn, and also our business is very seasonal. So we do have a pattern of hiring temporary workers in high season, having to train them up, and then letting them go again when the season ends.
Okay.
And that becoming more and more difficult. So we needed to
Okay.
get better at handling that, and we were able to have fewer temps, etc. So we needed to expand our basic workforce, which means we need to retain attract these people, retain them, and not lose them as well. So how do
Yeah.
we create a better environment to make that possible? That's kind of the whole backdrop of this.
And what about the executives? What type of answers? What were the typical answers you got from the executives
Well, the typical
about where they
answers,
needed to be?
yeah. So that was also very much around the engagement piece. There
Okay.
obviously was an interest in getting better business performance, but the interesting thing though was, and I think this is kind of unique, is that our CEO said, "I want a culture change. I don't just want tools. I don't just want to drive results. The results I think will follow. I want to give us time to build the culture, to get the right kind of behaviors in place." He got that piece. So that's
Right.
what he then emphasized amongst the team as well, to head in that direction and make that the focal point rather than we need to reduce costs.
Yeah, good.
That
Yeah,
that
excellent.
that was emphasized in the beginning very much as a secondary effect that
Yeah,
would
right.
follow.
Yeah, okay. So it seems like you used, before you started with Carter, you started with Carter.
Correct. And that's part of my message, right?
Yeah,
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 very much so.
yeah. No, and so in terms of the engagement side, were you able to, at that point, describe the goal, the challenge? I mean, Philip, the CEO, was that's where he wanted to go. But what did
Mhm.
this new culture look like? Did you get to that point at that stage, or
At that
where is
stage,
it?
no. So that was
No.
kind of loosely stated. We did have a
Yes.
target though, because we do a survey every 2 years. So we had input from areas to work on from that regard and a score that we could
Yes.
better on. And then the other thing is, of course, our turnover rate, our staff turnover rate, especially the voluntary turnover. So
Yeah.
those
Right.
then turned into specific goals that we're aiming to do initially arbitrarily make better. So we just picked
Yeah.
a
Right.
number a year down the road, 3 years down the road, etc., to aim for, just so we had something to aim for.
Yeah. Sort of outcome metrics, if you like,
An
for want of a
outcome
better
metric,
description.
yes. And then later on, what happened was once we got rolling with Kata, I introduced Ocean planning. And then we got more formal about defining specific goals for people, safety, quality, delivery, and cost, adapted to our context with specific A3s underneath it. And in the people A3, we specifically addressed engagement. We also have an A3 for continuous improvement or lean transformation. I'm moving away from the word lean, where we address, let's call it, building the mechanisms and the enablers to make all of this happen.
I'm just making a couple of notes because you've said something important there. Um, so really, I guess in your mind, you clearly were starting with scientific thinking up front.
Correct.
As part of that discussion, were you gauging the response of the others and how did that evolve in terms of, do we make this now? Do we bring in the practicing of kata such
Okay.
that not only I'm thinking this way, but everyone starts to think this way? How did that sort of evolve, if you like?
All right. So one of the things I did do was to talk about lean in general terms and give a bit of a lecture on it as to what works and what doesn't work, and that we should be aiming for a culture change rather than a tools implementation,
Right.
and the reasons for that, and the failures associated with that latter approach. So that was one piece. And then the following day, we actually did a Kata experiential, as Beth Carrington calls it. We got Beth Carrington from Kata Matters in, and
Oh yeah.
Brandon Brown
Good.
from our Continuous Coaching Commitment, to come and do a simulation with the executive team and the plant managers. We were at a joint meeting in January 2022, where after I'd done the lean introduction, we actually did this workshop where, with the card game, they got to experience how Kata
Uh-huh.
would work, right? Just the basics, a 4-hour seminar, basically.
And this is with the executives.
That's with the executives.
Yeah.
So
Right.
they got very excited because the competitive spirit came out, because that's why they were all executives. So they kind
Yes.
of lost the plot a little bit there, but because it was so exciting, they thought it was a really good thing, and they kind of got the gist of the message and said, "Yeah,
I,
this
I,
is a good thing. Let's try this."
I'll bet the executives were trying to come up with the answer, because that's what
Yeah.
executives are paid to do,
Yes.
provide the answer. It's
Yeah.
always a bit of a challenge I've found.
Well, but that was fascinating to see. But that's really how we kicked it off and introduced the
Yeah,
subject. So
yeah,
as
good.
a here's a way where we can introduce a way of working that will build the thinking that we ultimately need to get the culture. Where do you
Yeah,
guys want to
right.
start? So
Ah,
it was just kind of here it is. Where do you want to start? And the response was, so how do we do this? I said, well, what, back to my earlier high-level Kata questions from 6 months before, what are your pain points in your organization? Where could you pilot this? What makes sense for you? What problems do you want to solve? And that's how it
yes.
started coming together. So they then identified teams and areas in their operations to
Ah, yeah,
start
right.
this. And then we had our first wave of Kata kickoffs. First at one plant, then at another plant, then combined. We had several waves of this, and we started building these teams. So you have a 1 week kickoff, get a team trained, get several teams trained in how to do this by simulation and then by building their original board, which means the
Ah,
pre-work was we had them define challenges based on their pain points and objectives they needed to meet. So we set, so the leadership of the plant was challenged to help their teams develop these challenge statements with
okay.
outcome metrics and everything else that tied back to their operational needs. And then
Now,
we had the
yes.
training, they got started, and then it rolled from there.
Okay. Now, you've said something that I think people might be interested in. About 5 minutes ago, a couple of minutes ago, you said that you don't use the word lean anymore. So tell us a bit about that, because you did it, that executive thing you talked about, 2 minutes ago. You said you did introduce the concept of lean, but then you've stopped using. So tell us about that. How has that evolved, and why has it evolved that way?
Because there's so many misconceptions and different definitions of what lean means. It was intended to be based as an emulation of the Toyota production system, and it's evolved into something different. It's not the same.
No.
So therefore, I don't want to cause that and push that further confusion. To me, it's more important to talk about continuous improvement as a translation of Kaizen and creating that kind of culture of continuous improvement in the organization, and rather call it that.
So it's
Um,
about the people, not about the
it's about
process.
it's about the people,
Yeah.
yes, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
engagement and the involvement and the participation of the people.
No, fair enough. So Carissa, if you're on live and I get this wrong, I apologize. Carissa Berendet has said, "What do you has posted a question? What do you recommend for an organization that is starting out? How have you engaged your senior leaders to know what lean is?" I think to some extent you've answered that question. Is there anything you want to add to that? Particularly, how have you engaged your senior leaders to know what lean is? I think you've covered it, but is there anything you want to
I
add?
think I've covered it, but just to recap, you do need to give an introduction to provide some definitions. What I left out and what is also important is to get a common understanding of what culture is about. And that's where I base what I teach internally on what Edgar Schein has written about culture. So that would be a
Uh,
good
and,
reference there.
and how would you summarize what Edgar Schein's written about culture? Because
Well,
that's an important part
it,
of
it
all this.
it's all about the norms and behaviors, and the other key point is leaders own the culture. And
Yes.
he uses examples. I use the example of planting a garden and creating a beautiful garden out of a field of weeds and
Yeah,
bushes,
right.
and what that takes. And leaders have the same responsibility in the existing organization to either transform an existing garden to a different kind of garden, or from a field of weeds to the equivalent of a botanical garden.
Yeah,
And
good
therefore,
description.
then the work that needs to happen to make that happen. So that's all part of that introduction. And
Yeah.
then the natural lead in then is, well, how do we get people? You can't think your way into new behaviors. We need to be cognizant of BJ Fogg's behavior model in terms of motivation, ability, and prompt
Yes.
to drive new behaviors, to overcome existing patterns of thought and behaviors in order to create new thinking. So therefore, we need a mechanism to do that. So we talk about that. And
Yeah,
then
sure.
that's a natural entrance then to introduce Kata into the conversation, go through the
Yeah, right.
experiential, and then start experimenting with that. And I think that's been a great way for us anyway to actually embark on this journey and start building this culture in an organic way rather than in a program rollout kind of way.
So I think it'll be worth finishing the second half of what you said 45 seconds ago. You can't think yourself into a new way of behaving. So the other second half of that is you can be, through practicing behaviors, you can develop a new way of thinking.
Correct. And we've seen
Yeah,
that
which is,
time and again. When obviously when you roll out Kata and you're working with people that have been successful in the current environment, are now being challenged by having to adopt scientific thinking, kind of in a little bit of a forced environment because you're teaching them this new game, this new way of playing the game. So for some people, there's a lot of rolling of the eyes, etc., and a lot of pushback because they think they already have the answers,
yes.
only to find out that they along the way bump into, oh, we don't have the answers when they start grasping their current condition and running into obstacles. And then the penny drops, and then you can see the thinking kick in. And that's where the PDCA starts getting a life of its own.
Yeah, right. Um, I'd like to go back a little bit, but I think there's a question from Ewan Gilmore that's relevant here as well. And that is, he said, and because it ties in a little bit on what you were talking about with lean, it says, how do you overcome traditional ROI management styles to implement lean when implementing lean?
Okay. All right. So that's hard to avoid in most organizations because it's such a deeply entrenched preconception. So it's really difficult. So you need to gauge, is there a way whether we can actually overcome this or not? So one way to do that is, one, by having the conversation around having equal focus on people safety, quality, delivery, and cost, but in that order, so that cost would follow to take the emphasis away from the ROI piece.
Yes.
The other one would be, at some point in time, you need to confront that perception with reality and truth. It's actually not the right way to be thinking about things. When we think about training, for instance, we don't expect an ROI. How would you do that? Right? And really what we're doing with, and if you move away from the words lean implementation to culture transformation and different ways of working in order to adopt new ways of thinking, there's a whole lot of training involved to do that. That's where
Yeah.
Kata comes in.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
right.
So the approach is then therefore similar to training, and CI has the responsibility of helping to enable and equip people to get better at improving their work.
And I think you're also fortunate, if you don't mind me saying, is that Phil, who I've met, the CEO, was on this train already.
Correct. That is
So when you've
helpful,
got,
and
that is
that's
very helpful.
that is an essential ingredient. And as a CI leader in an organization or as an outside consultant, when you're confronted with that, is you're going to have to do a lot of statement of truth on the one hand that counters the prevailing thinking, but also a lot of coaching to prompt thinking
Yeah.
in an alternative mode. And
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes that's not possible. So then you need to
Yes.
weigh, how far can you push this until you push yourself out of that job? So
That's
and
reality,
and I've been there,
perhaps.
so that's reality.
Yeah, no. All right, a couple of more things then we've talked about the executive, and you've touched on, righto, they've bought in. Now, how do we get going? So can you tell us a bit more detail about that, how you got going? Because we have executive buy-in, we're going to have a crack at this. Right, let's go. So then when that decision was made, what did let's go look like?
Okay, let's go look like we planned a whole lot of kickoffs in sequence with different plans to get a number of teams, Kata teams, started up. Covered by external coaching from myself and Brandon Brown with those teams, particularly in the first 3 months, but up to a year. In the first 3 months, every cycle that they had a Kata cycle, we would call in more than once a week to see how it was going, to provide additional external coaching. Because the problem is when you start, nobody knows how to do this. So
When you
even though
say
you have a
call
kick,
in, that was
we
Teams
had
or
on Teams, yes. So
yeah,
we
on
would
Teams.
have
Yeah, it was
Teams
live online.
call-ins live online with coinciding with their normal coaching cycle time slot on their working day. So we accommodated that. So they didn't have to change their working day arrangements when they were having their coaching cycles in the plants.
So without getting too much into the weeds, were those coaching cycles occurring in the factory?
Yes.
So how did you do that? On a cell phone, did you, with Teams?
Yeah, no, with a laptop, or sometimes with a cell phone, or sometimes with a laptop and cell phone. Some of them came up with microphones and cameras like you've got in your office, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. But just to clarify there is the key thing is, because you're teaching learners, you're teaching, or you're coaching learners, you're coaching coaches, you're coaching second coaches, and you're coaching the shepherd group. So every plant created a shepherd group to oversee the practice of kata in their plant and the growth of it.
Yeah, right.
Initially, of course, they're all just learning, and the shepherd groups would have their own kata boards to oversee what they were doing, what they had as a challenge for kata, with kata in the organization,
okay, right.
and monthly target conditions.
Yes.
And then once we got that rolling, I did the same thing at the executive office with Phil and the rest of the executive team, and we took turns as learners as well. We rotated. So we have a shepherd group, the kata board, that oversees kata throughout the entire organization. And we keep a pulse on things as they're going, so we can help the local teams in the plants, either at a process team level or for the shepherd group, to coach them as needed. And to remove roadblocks.
Yeah, I find this fascinating, because this is what it is about, is use scientific thinking to develop scientific thinking to develop scientific thinking. Correct. And just cascade that down.
Yep.
And it's exactly the intent, as I understand it. I think lots of us have got lost in the method and the questions and all that, but the ultimate intent is to get scientific thinking rolling down the hill.
Yep.
Fascinating. You did say that you've run into, as you will with anything like this, and whatever the topic, you ran into some challenging people who already know this stuff. They know how to work, and they're going to push back when they're being encouraged to think a bit differently or practice thinking a bit differently. Tell us how that was handled, and without specific details, but tell us how that was handled.
Well, those are some of the more difficult moments, but you have to be firm and you have to be consistent. You have to be understanding as to where they're coming from, but you got to keep on coaching. So you've got to challenge them until you get a breakthrough.
Yeah.
Without telling them or mandating something. So it needs to go back to their motivation. So you need to use a little bit of motivational coaching in there as well, because assuming that they have some interest in doing this and not feel that they're completely obliged to only do this, you can start working into, well, you want to improve, don't you? So if we do things always the way we've always done it, what will we get?
Yeah, the same result. Okay, there's a bit of
so we just use that coaching approach interspersed with the kata coaching questions adapted to the particular situation, and clarifying as well, because sometimes the misunderstanding occurs is that we as outsiders are sticking our nose in their business and are challenging their thinking about the technicalities of their process, which is not the case. We're just curious. Help me understand what exactly you're talking about, because I don't understand. And it is hard. I'm an engineer, right? So I do tend to want to delve into the subject matter, where as a coach you shouldn't. So that's one of the tricks there, is to stay out of the subject matter.
Sure.
And stay focused.
That's not your role.
No, it's not the role.
No, the role is the thinking pattern. The role is not
Correct.
The subject matter.
Correct.
Yeah, very good point.
And
that was a big
release
release
pattern.
Yeah, that was a big release for me. I remember a general manager saying to me years ago, so therefore you no longer have to have the answer. Exactly right. You just make sure people are following a pattern, because if they are, the answer will be discovered.
Yes.
And that's faith in that, and it's absolutely true.
And that's what happened. And that's what they then saw themselves.
Yeah, right.
So now the eye rollers are the biggest advocates.
Yeah. So just a question. Simran Lala has asked, how did you track your progress through the coaching cycles that you were referring to a couple of minutes ago? Did managers take ownership of specific tasks and track it themselves?
So in some instances, yes, the Shepherd group was taking charge of, are the coaching cycles taking place? Are we as Shepherd group members attending the coaching cycles? And they were keeping scorecards on that.
Okay.
We as an overall, initially in the beginning, kept the scorecard. I watched because I was the main learner on the board. So I was watching for the occurrence of the coaching cycles. Okay. And then I watched for were the learners doing the PDCAs? So are they following the pattern on a daily basis? And if they were falling off the daily pattern, then we would coach that through the Shepherd group or with a particular team to encourage them to get back into a daily pattern and to deal with whatever is preventing them from doing that. So yes, we looked at all those aspects that ensured that the learner was following the improvement kata, the board is being used correctly, that the coaching cycles are happening in a daily fashion, and the coaching cycles happening according to the routine on the card.
Sure.
And to make sure that that was happening. And then we layered in to what extent are teams accomplishing their target condition and creating a score for that. So we've got a broad scorecard where we track all these kinds of factors to see how the teams are learning in their learning and advancing also with the subject matter that they're trying to move towards a particular goal.
I haven't heard of that before. So you're providing some objective measurement, if you like,
yes,
on the evidence of the cycle of thinking. Target conditions, for example.
And we started that off, and then the Shepherd groups at the plants themselves developed further methods to get into the weeds of tracking those kinds of details themselves once they got the hang of the basics.
Okay. Probably one last question. We're getting very close to the bottom of the hour. What's been the biggest win? If you were to put in a few words, the biggest win, what's been the biggest win for Helena in this?
Wow. Well, the biggest win is to see the smiles on the faces participating in this and the enthusiasm that is being voiced through that. And then the excitement with that the executives are showing in response to this. Our executives call in the engagement piece. So our executives do call into some of these kata sessions. When they visit a plant, they make a point of visiting coaching katas. And they're blown away by, the engagement, and they're blown away by the results that people are getting.
Yeah, good.
So that's, to me, is the rewarding part.
And that cycles back around to what Phil, the CEO, was after right from the start, was a movement in culture.
Yeah. I had a 20-year veteran senior leader say to me, you know what, we've tried continuous improvement in various ways or forms in the past. This is the first time I've actually seen stickiness. This is sticking. This is amazing.
I wonder if part of a goal would be when people are continuously improving, they're smiling.
Yeah. Yeah.
That might be an interesting one. All right.
Smiles forever.
Yes, very common. So we're very close to the bottom of the hour. A point I will make is Dirk is presenting at KataCon 11 in Indianapolis in April 1, 2. Correct me if I'm wrong with those dates, Jim or Skylar. But Dirk's presenting there. That's your opportunity to see him first, to meet Dirk firsthand and ask him a heap more questions than we've been able to cover in this short half hour. So I strongly encourage you to attend and get in the ear of people like Dirk, because they're a wealth of knowledge, and what's worked for them may not work for you specifically, but they'll certainly be able to give you some things that you can try. So thanks, Dirk. Really appreciated the discussion. Thanks, Skylar, again for your organising. And Skylar or Jim, is there anything else you want to add?
Dirk, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. Oscar, as always, thank you. Just a quick reminder, you will receive a link within 24 to 48 hours. Jim, do you want to say something?
No, thank you very much. Great conversation there. I think there was one comment in the Q&A that popped up towards the end.
I didn't see that, but we're out of time. Oh, we're very close to time. What was it?
The 4P model must be linked ideally to create a lean culture change. What do you think? Top management is not an option. It's a must.
I think that will take more than a minute to answer, and we're out. So, Gerardo, if you're, I love the question. Come to KataCon and ask Dirk. There's the answer. Ask Dirk directly. So thanks, guys. And Beth and Brandon, I see you both on. You did a terrific job of getting Helena started with this. Very impressed. Well done.